In 2026, the war between Ukraine and Russia has entered its fifth year, and what began in February 2022 as a lightning invasion has hardened into one of the most consequential and transformative conflicts of the 21st century. The front lines have shifted, technologies have evolved, alliances have deepened, and the global order has been reshaped in ways few could have predicted when the first missiles struck. To understand where the war stands in 2026, we need to trace how it evolved. From a rapid offensive aimed at decapitating a government into a grinding, attritional conflict that has redefined modern warfare. When Russian forces crossed the border in 2022, the Kremlin appeared to expect a swift collapse of Ukrainian resistance. Columns pushed toward Kyiv, airborne troops attempted to seize key airfields, and armored formations advanced from multiple directions. The stated aim was demilitarization and denazification, but the strategic objective was clear: force a political surrender and pull Ukraine firmly back into Moscow's orbit. That objective failed. Ukrainian forces, galvanized by national resistance and bolstered by Western support, halted the initial assault. President Volodymyr Zelensky became the symbol of defiance, refusing evacuation and rallying domestic and international backing. Russian troops were pushed back from northern Ukraine by spring 2022, and what followed was a brutal contest in the east and south. By 2023 and 2024, the war had settled into a deadly equilibrium. Vast trench systems scarred the landscape across Donbass. Drone warfare expanded at unprecedented speed. Artillery once again became the dominant force on the battlefield. Casualties mounted into the hundreds of thousands on both sides. Sanctions hammered the Russian economy, yet it adapted. Ukraine's infrastructure suffered repeated bombardment, yet the state endured. Now in 2026, the war looks different again. The front line stretches across the eastern and southern regions, including heavily contested areas of Donetsk Oblast and Luhansk Oblast. Fighting continues near strategic cities such as Kharkiv and Odessa, while the southern axis remains critical due to access to the Black Sea. The status of Crimea remains one of the most explosive issues in the entire conflict. Russia, under President Vladimir Putin, has transformed its economy into a wartime footing. Defense spending consumes a massive share of the national budget. Military production has surged, with factories running around the clock to produce artillery shells, drones, and armored vehicles. Sanctions have limited access to Western technology, but alternative supply chains through Asia and the Middle East have mitigated some of the pressure. Ukraine, for its part, has become one of the most militarized societies in Europe. Conscription has expanded. Women have taken on expanded roles in logistics, medicine, and in some cases, combat units. Western-supplied weapon systems, from long-range missiles to advanced air defense, have given Ukrainian forces capabilities unimaginable before 2022. But perhaps the most striking development by 2026 is the technological transformation of the battlefield. Drones are everywhere. Small quadcopters scout enemy trenches. Loitering munitions circle silently before diving into armored vehicles. Swarms of autonomous systems probe weak points in defensive lines. Both sides have integrated artificial intelligence into targeting systems, shortening the kill chain from detection to strike. Electronic warfare units jam signals, disrupt communications, and wage invisible battles in the electromagnetic spectrum. The war has become a laboratory for modern combat. In earlier phases, artillery barrages dominated headlines. In 2026, precision and persistence matter more than sheer volume. Counter-battery radar systems track incoming shells within seconds. Satellite imagery, often commercially available, provides near real-time intelligence. The transparency of the battlefield means surprise is fleeting. Movement is deadly. Camouflage and deception have returned as essential survival skills. One of the most dangerous flashpoints remains the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The plant has changed hands and been shelled repeatedly over the years, raising global fears of a nuclear disaster. By 2026, international inspectors continue to monitor the site under tense arrangements. But the risk remains. Any major incident there could escalate the war beyond Ukraine's borders. Beyond the battlefield, the geopolitical consequences have been profound. The war forced NATO to reassess its eastern defenses. Member states increased defense spending dramatically. Troops were deployed to frontline countries. New members joined, reshaping the alliance's strategic map. Military exercises along the alliance's eastern flank became routine, signaling deterrence. The European Union accelerated efforts to reduce dependence on Russian energy. Pipelines were rerouted. LNG terminals were built at record speed. Renewable energy projects gained urgency. While the transition was painful, particularly in 2022 and 2023, by 2026, Europe's energy landscape looks significantly different. The United States has remained Ukraine's largest single military backer, though domestic political debates have intensified over the scale and duration of aid. Successive aid packages have provided advanced air defense systems, armored vehicles, and financial assistance. However, the war's longevity has tested political unity across the Atlantic. Meanwhile, Russia has deepened partnerships with non-Western powers. Arms deals, energy agreements, and diplomatic coordination have created a loose bloc of states skeptical of Western sanctions regimes. The Global South, wary of great power competition, has often taken a more neutral stance, focusing on food security and energy prices. Food security is another underappreciated dimension of the war in 2026. Ukraine remains a major agricultural exporter. Disruptions to grain shipments in earlier years triggered price spikes across Africa and the Middle East. Naval confrontations in the Black Sea threaten shipping routes. By 2026, fragile agreements allow limited exports, but every missile strike on port infrastructure sends ripples through global markets. Economically, both Ukraine and Russia have paid staggering costs. Ukraine's GDP contracted sharply in the early years of the war. Entire cities were destroyed. Infrastructure, from bridges to power stations, required constant repair. Yet a wartime economy has emerged, driven by defense production, international aid, and a resilient IT sector that continues to operate despite blackouts and missile strikes. Russia's economy has been reshaped by sanctions and state intervention. Capital controls stabilize the ruble in the short term. Energy exports shifted toward Asia. Domestic production substituted for some imports. However, long-term technological isolation poses structural challenges. brain drain has accelerated, with many young professionals leaving the country since 2022. Socially, the war has left deep scars. Millions of Ukrainians were displaced internally or sought refuge abroad. By 2026, some have returned to rebuilt areas, while others have put down roots in host countries. A generation of children has grown up amid air raid sirens. Veterans on both sides grapple with physical injuries and psychological trauma. In Russia, public dissent has been tightly controlled. Independent media has been curtailed. Critics of the war face legal consequences. Yet despite repression, the human cost is felt in small towns and cities, where casualties have mounted year after year. The war has also reshaped military doctrine globally. Armies around the world study lessons from Ukraine. The vulnerability of tanks to cheap drones. The critical importance of logistics. The central role of air defense in protecting cities. The necessity of resilient communications networks. Procurement strategies have shifted accordingly, with greater emphasis on unmanned systems and electronic warfare. One of the defining characteristics of the war in 2026 is its hybrid nature. Cyber attacks continue alongside conventional operations. Infrastructure networks are targeted digitally as well as physically. Disinformation campaigns flood social media, aiming to shape public opinion domestically and abroad. Information warfare has become as strategic as control of territory. Despite years of fighting, neither side has achieved total victory. Russia controls significant territory in eastern and southern Ukraine, but at enormous cost. Ukraine has regained ground in certain sectors and inflicted heavy losses, yet full territorial restoration remains elusive. The front lines are fortified, layered with minefields, anti-tank obstacles, and entrenched positions reminiscent of World War I. Diplomatic efforts have flickered intermittently. Various ceasefire proposals have emerged, often brokered by third parties. Prisoner exchanges have taken place. Humanitarian corridors have opened and closed. Yet fundamental disagreements remain unresolved. Sovereignty, territorial control, security guarantees, and the future alignment of Ukraine. For Ukraine, the war is existential. It is about statehood, identity, and independence. For Russia, it is framed as a struggle against Western encroachment and a defense of strategic depth. These narratives leave little room for compromise. As 2026 unfolds, the possibility of escalation still looms. Long-range missile strikes have targeted infrastructure deep behind front lines. Air defense systems intercept many, but not all. Each strike carries the risk of spillover into neighboring countries. The presence of foreign volunteers and advisors adds complexity. Although direct confrontation between Russia and NATO has been avoided, incidents in airspace and at sea have occasionally brought tensions dangerously high. Nuclear rhetoric, while less frequent than in 2022, has not disappeared. Strategic deterrence remains in the background of every calculation. Military planners on both sides operate under the shadow of potential escalation, even as they wage a conventional war. And yet, amid the destruction, there are signs of adaptation and resilience. Ukrainian cities have developed layered air defense networks. Underground schools operate during periods of heavy bombardment. Reconstruction projects begin almost as soon as areas are deemed relatively secure. Digital governance platforms continue functioning, allowing citizens to access services despite wartime conditions. In Russia, the state emphasizes stability and continuity. Patriotic messaging saturates media. War production sustains employment in industrial regions. The leadership projects confidence, even as the conflict drags on. Internationally, the war has accelerated a broader fragmentation of the global order. Sanctions regimes, trade realignments, and competing financial systems have created parallel economic spheres. Defense budgets have risen worldwide. Neutral states hedge their positions carefully. The idea of a fully integrated post-Cold War world now feels distant. What might the rest of 2026 hold? Several scenarios are possible. A breakthrough on the battlefield, driven by technological innovation, or a collapse in morale, could shift momentum. A negotiated freeze could lock in current lines, creating a de facto partition. Alternatively, intensified offensives could expand the conflict's scale and human cost. Much depends on domestic politics within both countries. War fatigue is real. Casualty numbers are immense. Economic pressures accumulate. Yet national narratives remain hardened. The war between Ukraine and Russia in 2026 is not just a regional conflict. It is a crucible in which the future of European security, the limits of military power, and the resilience of democratic and authoritarian systems are being tested. It has revived trench warfare and accelerated drone swarms. It has redrawn alliances and redefined deterrence. It has displaced millions and reshaped global markets. And above all, it has demonstrated that in the 21st century, even in an age of advanced technology and economic interdependence, large-scale conventional war between major states is not a relic of the past. As the world watches, the outcome remains uncertain. What is clear is that the consequences, strategic, economic, and human, will echo far beyond 2026, shaping Europe and the international system for decades to come.